Hi everyone, it's Sam, NFTstatistics with your proof daily NFT countdown. I mean, what a crazy week we had last week. Surprise after surprise, announcement after announcement. And what we're gonna do here is go into the data from the weekend and say, what was the aftermath of those announcements? What glimpse can we get into how the market is treating this new environment? And the first thing we're gonna talk about is the OpenSea move. On Friday, OpenSea tweeted that they are going to be not enforcing royalties above half of 1%. There were three big components of their announcement. The first was that their platform fee has gone from 2.5% to 0% for a temporary period. The second is that royalties will be optional above half of 1%. And the third is that if projects block LooksRare and Pseudo, then those projects will have royalties enforced on OpenSea. Okay, this is one of the big things that when Blur went to no royalty enforcement at all above half of 1% last week, what they said is what their goal was to make it so OpenSea allowed projects to not block Blur and to enforce royalties as long as Blur enforced royalties. So that was, so they kind of got what they wanted, and that was one of the developments that happened last week. And we'll show the data on how that played out a little bit later. Now, the other move that happened almost immediately after OpenSea made this move was that Blur said that because they no longer have this pricing advantage, they wanted to do something. And they said what they were going to do was allow people to airdrop farm faster, to trade NFTs faster. They used to have a 3-hour limit. If you bought an NFT, you couldn't sell it for 3 hours. So that did kind of slow down some of the recycling and that really quick churn. They lowered that to 1 hour. So that just led to a huge uptick in volume, a huge uptick in just faster airdrop farming, and we'll show that. But what were the big results of these changes? The first is that royalties were down big on OpenSea. You can see right here, this is the average royalty paid per day by exchange. OpenSea was around 5% last week. On the back of this news, they went down to 2% yesterday. So really kind of taking a hit there. Still well above Blur at half of 1%. But I do think that will go lower. One of the reasons is that it's the seller that decides whether or not to pay royalties above half of 1%. And a lot of the listings on OpenSea were listed before this move. So I imagine over time, these royalties will go lower. We'll see what happens. The second thing kind of in this bucket is that projects like art blocks, most art blocks were not tradable on Blur before, okay, for technical reasons. So this is the first time that art blocks have really been optional royalty. And what you see here is that the average royalty paid yesterday got as low as 1.5%. So really seeing some of these art projects have the royalties go down really quickly. Braindrops was tradable on Blur, but the vast majority of volume was on OpenSea. The average royalty paid on Braindrops over the weekend went from 7.5% to about 3%. So a lot of these projects that did not have to have this choice are opting for the for the low royalty option. Now, I did say that newer projects who could block exchanges had royalties maintained, and that showed up in the data as well. Digi-Daigaku Dragons, 9.7% average royalty. Mutant Houndcallers, Mutant Houndcallers Captains, Kid Called Beast, all these projects where you can adjust the contract and block exchanges, did actually have their royalties upheld, and that worked out well for them, if their goal is to keep their royalties in place. Another big theme that happened is that airdrop farming was up big on Blur, probably a result of this move that Blur made for more frequent recycling of NFTs. Here's my favorite, AI picture of airdrop farming. Made that last week, showing it again. But ETH volumes, as a result of this, up basically at 9-month highs, double where we were 2 days ago. And 2 days ago, we were at kind of recent highs other than the couple prior days. So just keeps going higher and higher. Now, when volumes go up, you'd expect buyers to go up as well. And that did a little bit, but not by much. Unique buyers was still kind of basically in the range that we've been at for the past few months. So what happens when you have huge ETH volumes and not new buyers? The average ETH spent per buyer goes through the roof again. You can see here we were at 2.7 ETH spent per buyer in NFTs. Prior to this weekend, kind of the average had been half of 1 ETH to 1 ETH. So still pretty wild numbers there. And the other thing is this chart looks at the average flip per NFT. The average NFT traded on Blur over the weekend was traded 2.3 times. So the majority of NFTs traded more than once, which is near historic highs for that metric. Now, a couple other charts that I just thought really kind of bring to light how weird this weekend was. Everyone knows Franklin. He's a great trader, a huge ape holder, and he's always very good at finding profit opportunities and going big on them. He did 2,300 trades over the past week. Okay. This number is just so far outsized versus any total trade count Franklin has ever had. There was one time where he bought 512 beans in one basic swoop. You can see it right here. These are beans from Azuki. Just had one sweep that kind of went through where over 500 were bought. The price went up, then sellers came in and the price reverted, which is basically a lot of what happens in this environment. Nouns is a project that has very little secondary volume. And, over the course of the past year has basically never had more than 5 trades in one day. There were 60 over the weekend in one day. So just another example, this became an airdrop farm project, 60 trades in one day. These 3 NFTs win my gold medal, the Olympics of flipping. Each of them were flipped 24 times over the weekend. Next thing, one other trend, I already said, volume's up big. Royalties overall were actually flat. So if you look at the total royalties paid across the marketplaces, it was actually pretty flat relative to the past. Obviously, one thing you can see in that chart though, is that Blur had a majority of the royalty volume. Okay, this is the first time that's ever happened. OpenSea royalty rate went down. Blur volumes went through the roof. 0.5% on a through the roof volume is still a fair amount of royalties. Nothing crazy, but higher than what was paid out of OpenSea. Now, here are my takeaways about all this data, all this chaos. Okay, the first is I think that what's happening here, how is it that traders who are airdrop farming are paying 344 ETH in royalties on Blur, which is what they paid yesterday? And the reason is that the Blur market cap at $3.5 billion, they've shown that over the next 6 or 7 months, they're going to be giving 300 million Blur to the community, to people who do the things they're incentivizing. Okay, that equals about $2 million per day, 1,200 ETH per day in this token going to the community. So when you're giving 1,200 ETH per day projected, assuming that the Blur token stays where it is, it could go higher, it could go a lot lower, who knows? But within that perspective, spending 344 ETH on fees, on royalties, actually sort of makes sense for the community as a whole. If the royalty spend gets above that number, that would be different. Obviously, a lot of these trades are at a loss, but you can take a bunch of losses when you're getting so much money from that airdrop. Okay, just to put this into further perspective, the current market cap of Blur is worth more than the floor-based market cap of Bored Ape Yacht Club, CryptoPunks, Mutant Apes, Chromie Squiggles, CloneX, Moonbird, Pudgy Penguins, and Doodles combined. Okay, so there's just so much money in this token that they have as a war chest to give to people. The second thing, what I kind of think is happening here is that Blur is using their massive market cap to increase their volume. They use this market cap, they give the token to people because they think giving that token will increase the volume that we're talking about, and then increased volume they think will increase the price of the token. It'll make people think they're doing better. So you kind of have this circular situation where you use your high token price, incentivize people to trade, people see more volume is trading, and then they bid up the price of the token because it has the most market share. It's kind of this circular thing. I'm not sure it reflects real economic activity. I think it's a little bit uncertain, but I think that's what's happening here. Now, what would make me more positive on the chaos? One is that if you actually saw actual users go higher. If we get to a place where more people are buying NFTs, like more users every day, we're seeing a bit of that in the ecosystem, but not a lot. That would make me more positive too. I think higher royalties, higher fees. When people are willing to pay royalties or fees, you know that it's a bit more of a real transaction. So we did see royalties go a little bit up, but if you start seeing more of that, that starts to feel like more economic activity. And the third is for floor prices to go higher. As NFT owners, we don't really care if there's a ton of volume. All we care is that prices go higher, that there's more buyers, more people interested. That's like what the healthy ecosystem would look like. So let's talk a bit about that. What was the price movement like over the course of the weekend? Large caps up a touch, basically flat. World of Women became a target for airdrop farmers. That went up 17%. Cool Cats up 9%. And Moonbirds were a little bit weak. Mid cap index was actually down. It was down big on Friday and then up a little bit on Friday and Saturday. Renga had one of the biggest rises. Quirky's one of the biggest falls. In terms of projects that were outstanding, and this is a bit of a different topic, but one of the crazy things that happened yesterday, was that VV checks just completely ripped again. So you can see here, the floor, was down below 1 ETH right now. For the open edition, they're at about 2.5 ETH. So that was pretty crazy. I just added this red line here. What this red line looks at is the ones that have already been minted into 80 check NFTs. And that floor actually went down. So that gambler's premium for people for the open edition versus the ones that have been minted is about as wide as it's ever been. Another thing within that project, a 5 check sold for 22 ETH. 5 checks is worth 16 80 checks. So I'm just doing the math for you. What does this 22 ETH sale means? It means that each NFT is worth 1.375 ETH if you actually look at the 16s. So that is well below where the open editions are. I've always said, as a holder, it's almost never in your interest to burn them, to turn them into kind of the minted 80 check. And then with every 80 check you burn, you get to 40, 20, 10, 5, 4, 1. With every one of those you do, you lose a little bit of option value. And I think it does hurt the value. And we saw a little bit of that with this 5 check sale, a little bit below had you just bought those individual checks where they were. Another thing that was pretty massive, we'll just start with this chart, was Opepen edition went completely parabolic. Okay, right now it says here 0.37 ETH in this chart. The last I checked was actually 0.6 ETH. Just on Friday, Opepen edition was at 0.09 ETH. So we're up something like 6x in the past 3 days. What happened here? 2 things. First, Jack Butcher tweeted PFP. Okay, basically saying, could this be a PFP? In the podcast where we had Jack, we talk about PFPs. He said maybe he would consider doing one at one point. Who knows if that's what's happened here? But I think people are thinking, oh wow, Opepen edition is turning into something interesting. The second thing was that he switched the metadata as he did on BB checks. First the green dot, then the image. That's right there right now. That's it. That's what happened. And they went up from 0.09 to 0.6 ETH. That's the world we live in. Curious to see how this one plays out. And then the third section, the last thing I want to talk about, is a bunch of notable sales outside of checks. Outside of all this chaos with royalties, there was some great art being sold. Let's talk about that really quickly. The first is this Fidenza number 157, sold for 390 ETH. Absolutely massive sale. The wallet is a new wallet that bought it. It has like 2 subducts and 1 Fidenza. That's it. But this exact Fidenza was sold less than a month ago for 125 ETH. So basically a 3x trade over less than a month. Congrats to whoever sold that. Always nice to see buyers who love the art buying the one they love. I always say the Justin Bieber rule, which is if you have a non-forever NFT, something that at certain prices you'd sell, just list it. List your Fidenza at 390. Maybe someone will sell. Why do I call it the Bieber rule? Because Bieber spent over $1 million on this floor ape. Whoever owned this ape just listed it. Bieber picked it up. It was one that resonated with his song, and he got the money. So always list your NFTs if it's not one you want to keep forever and pass to your kids. Next sale to talk about is actually 2 sales. There were 2 XCOPY one-of-ones that sold. The first, this one on the left, was a new sale. This one sold for 250 ETH to Kelvin Co. And this other one, this right, says it's called FOMO. And this was a secondary sale, but this one sold for 235 ETH. Congrats to XCOPY, the seller, as well as the buyers. Now, putting this 250 ETH one-of-one into perspective, obviously, XCOPY's biggest sale was 1,600 ETH for Right Click and Save as a guy. He's also had a bunch of sales above 400 or 500 ETH. His most recent one-of-one sale in secondary, though, was just 206.9 ETH. So 250 ETH, still a punchy, nice price. So congrats to him on that. Third sale to talk about, Infinite Ceremony by Sam Spratt. We've been talking about Sam Spratt recently. His sales have just been going higher and higher, but he sold this on Art of the Moment, on Art of the Millennium, AOTM for 154.69 ETH. Very much an all-time high. He's had one sale above 100, but other sales are in the 50, 72, 60.7 ETH range. Here he's thanking the buyer for believing in this Lucy project, Woodmere Clubcap. Now I looked at who Woodmere Clubcap the buyer was, and the buyer really didn't have any tweets aside from talking about Sam Spratt and the Lucy project. But, very celebratory tweet here saying, today we celebrate he was in a bidding war with Vincent Van Dough. Congrats to the buyer and the seller on this purchase. And then lastly, Jeremy Booth, we know of Boots fame, had a one-of-one. It sold for 8 ETH. I look back at Jeremy Booth sales, and they've been in the 4.5 range. So this was an all-time high for Jeremy. Congrats to Jeremy on this. It kind of puts into perspective, looking at these one-on-one sales, just how huge the market cap is for Boots. The Boots, each one is only 0.09 ETH, but the market cap put all together is 600 ETH. So kind of an interesting display here of the gamification and the value that's creating for artists, creators, as well as for collectors right now. That's all from me. So much to talk about. Such an interesting day. Let us know what you think. What are your thoughts on this OpenSea move, on how it played out this weekend? Does any of this data surprise you? We'll be back tomorrow and every weekday. Have a great day.